We're in Terre Haute, Indiana with my friend Mark Klein. Mr. Klein, I remember meeting you in 1983 when I first started getting on stage seriously. How long had you been doing comedy in 1983?
About 3 years. This is 2010. I'm 30 years into this business. It owes me nothing, and I'm getting lots of it. But it's been great to me. Well, you know, you see the country and see the world doing this for a living. Cruise ships, comedy clubs, corporate events. Not a complaint in the world. It's been great.
Where did you start in Louisville?
Well, I started doing comedy in college. To make extra money, I would do shows at fraternity parties, and I set up a comedy show at a hotel downtown. And I went to a comedy concert, excuse me, I saw Robert Klein in concert.
Oh, wow.
With Lily Tomlin.
Wow.
At Lemoyne College up near Syracuse. And I went to Colgate upstate New York, so I drove over to see this concert. When I saw their show, a voice went off in my head that said, "You can do that. That is a learned skill, not an inborn skill. You can learn that." And that's why I decided to become a professional comedian.
So there weren't comedy clubs, so you just started performing.
You would take stage time anywhere you could get it. Strip joints, jazz clubs, coffee houses, anybody with a piano bench you could stand on in a cocktail party. You would get up there and yak and tell jokes. And the bigger fool you made of yourself, the less you had to lose the next time. And one thing led to another. It was great. So
do you get back to Louisville? What was the comedy scene like in Louisville when you got back from college?
There was no comedy scene there at all. So I took a real job for a while, and I met an agent named Tom Sobel, who was booking a group called the Juggernaut Jug Band at the time, but we wanted to get into comedy for some reason. So I set up a comedy show with a club owner in Cincinnati named Don Maris, who had the DWI Club, I think it was called, up on Clifton Street, up near Cincinnati. And my first paid comedy gig, working out of Louisville in the Midwest, was to drive up to the DUI Club for $30 and back to Louisville, no hotel of course, for gas money and probably about half of all you could drink, and that was the deal, which is great. And so they started opening comedy clubs. Every city in the country all of a sudden wanted a comedy club, and there weren't enough comics to fill them, so it was a seller's market for talent. And boy, we'd go on the road. There was only about 10 or 12 of us in the Midwest who had the time to cover stage time for all this. And we'd go on the road 45, 46 weeks a year, and they'd pay you in cash and on to the next town and the next couple drinks and tell jokes and have a few drinks, flirt with pretty girls, and I was going to do that anyway, so why not? It's a career.
How different is it now? Obviously, so much different, but how do you find yourself filling your schedule now that there's a glut of comedians? There's so many more comedians than there is work.
Well, there's as much work out there as you want. You just have to create it for yourself. My schedule has gone from being 45 weeks a year on the road in comedy clubs to 15 comedy club weeks a year and 10 cruise ship weeks a year and 30 to 40 corporate events a year. And a couple shows at a country club here and a few shows at a Moose Lodge there. And you look up and all of a sudden your calendar's still pretty full. It's not full in comedy clubs in Chicago or Louisville or New Orleans. It's full of fraternity lodges and country clubs and corporate events and a ship here and there. There's a lot of work out there. People love to laugh, and they love to have laughter brought to them, and that's what I do. My mission statement is, I talk, you laugh. That's the deal.
Acts you're working with, how have they changed?
Oh. Well, one would think, in something that has gone from a seller's market for talent to a buyer's market for talent, they would be buying better talent. However, various economic circumstances combine to create an atmosphere. There's so many comics looking for work. They will all work so cheaply that it's actually depressed the market for good comedians, people who know what their product is worth and won't sell it otherwise. Aren't too many of those guys left out there. The people with whom I work, their comedy's changed because these are young guys coming up, and their whole worldview is different from mine. Their worldview is people who grew up, came of age in the 80s. Well, in the 80s, I was already 35 years old. So there's a generational difference in the type of comedians with whom I work. You don't see many variety acts anymore. You don't see comedy jugglers, comedy magicians working the comedy clubs. You don't see many impressionists anymore. You see the same basic guy. He's between 23 and 33. He thinks he has a right to be bitter and sarcastic and worldly. Of course, he's seen nothing, been nowhere, and done nothing, but that doesn't stop him or her. And that's what they think sells, and to some extent they're right, but to some extent they're not. I think we've gotten away from variety entertainment in the comedy world, and that's a shame, because I love variety performers. I have no variety skills. I cannot sing, I cannot juggle, I cannot do magic, none of that stuff, and I greatly admire people that can. So I always like working with variety performers on the show.
What are some of your, obviously you have so many years on the road, any road stories, any things that took place that you could share with us?
I'll tell you a story that indicates the status that comedians have in American society. I met my wife in Savannah, Georgia. I was doing a show in a comedy club down there. Tall, pretty redhead, sits in the front row. She didn't laugh at a word I said. I thought to myself, if she can't make you miserable, nobody can. So I had to meet her going out. She's walking out the door. I stopped her and said, "Ma'am, you didn't much care for me." And she goes, "Well, no, I didn't." And I said, "Well, lady, I got more charm in this than a car. I mean, whatever you need to hear, I got. I got whatever you need to hear. I can make it up." So she laughed at that. We started talking, went out for a couple of drinks. Went back to Savannah, Georgia a year later. Didn't call her nothing. A year later. We didn't spend the night together. We just had a couple of drinks, that was it. Go back a year later, and we met for, I had her number, invited her to the show, and after a couple of dates, I knew this was somebody with whom I wanted to get serious. She told her mother about me, and her mom asked her, "Well, tell me something about this guy you're serious with." My wife goes, "He's a Jewish comedian from Kentucky." My future mother-in-law goes, "Not a comedian." That was the deal killer. Not a comic. Anything but that. So I've seen stand-up comics go from being people who, no one knew stand-up comics. You know, 30 years ago, if you were a comedian, no one knew another comedian. Now everybody says, "I got a cousin who's a comedian. Do you know him? I got a, you know, my girlfriend's dating a guy." Everyone's a comedian. Well, when I first started, there were no comedians out there, and you thought you were someone special, and you had a skill that was considered rare. Now you have a skill that's considered, even though doing it well still is rare, in the general viewpoint it's considered to be rather pedestrian. And that's a little disappointing. Having made my living trying to bring laughter into people's lives, to see the regard in which it is held, you know, the Chuckle Hut in Carbondale, Illinois, well, every city's got 3 of those now, so how special can it be? Well, it still is special. It's very special. And I will tell you, as a performer, it's as special to me now, 30 years into it, as it was the day I started. And I wish I could let my audiences know this in a way that they would understand, but my audiences do more for me than I could ever do for them. And entertaining people is my career, and it's a joy and a blessing, not a chore or a job.
Any person that you worked with previously that stands out in your mind that was really a dream come true or a neat thing?
I remember, you meet a lot of performers who have feet of clay. You kind of wish you'd never met them. You just wanted to think of them as you saw them on TV or grew up admiring them. I met Pat Paulson from Atlanta.
Oh, yeah.
And I was hoping he would be as nice as I thought he was. He was a wonderful gentleman with whom to work. He was as nice as you hope he is. He was as funnier than you possibly remember him being. And he was old then. Pat was pushing 70 when I worked with him, and he'd been retired. He was still doing occasional one-night concert work. He was gracious, funny, classy, gentlemanly, everything you wanted to see in yourself at the end of your career, he was. And it was a joy to meet him.